Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining the third spotlight session of the Big Brainstorm. There is a 2-week design sprint happening all around us as we speak. Over 250 young innovators from around the world have come together to collaborate and develop solutions to pressing global challenges, including for the future of work, which is our topic today. My name is Saru Duckworth. I work at the BRAC Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative, which ensures women and girls in extreme poverty are supported and not left behind to create sustainable livelihoods. It's my pleasure to be moderating today as the Next Generation Fellow for Jobs with the UN Foundation. And UNF is really deeply committed to supporting changemakers and shaping global agendas through collaborations like this. So I want to welcome many of our young innovators who are joining us today for advice and insights as they develop their own solutions. We're also joined by an incredible panel of speakers to guide us and discuss how youth are transforming work and how we can ultimately create more just and inclusive economies for the future. So there's no small task ahead of us at all today, but luckily we have some true experts here. We'll begin with a fireside chat with Sue Duke, the Vice President and Head of Global Public Policy and Economic Graph at LinkedIn, in conversation with Mona Idrisu, the Head of Youth Employment and Skills at the African Center for Economic Transformation. We'll then follow this with a second fireside chat with Matthieu, Cognac, the Senior Multilateral Cooperation Advisor at the ILO, and Ruth Khakame, the ITUC Africa Youth Chair. We'll then finish with a quick fire round before going into Q&A to hear from all of you. So please introduce yourself in the chat. I see some of you are already doing so. Share your ideas and questions, and we'll come back to those later. So to frame our discussion briefly today, I want to highlight the urgent link for youth between SDG 1 on eradicating poverty and SDG 8 on decent work. And we see this in the numbers. Globally, we know that young people are more than twice as likely as adults to live in poverty and more than 3 times as likely to lose their jobs. Youth are also overrepresented in the 200 million people that work but still live in poverty. These figures alone are really staggering, but it's so difficult, I think, to comprehend what it might feel like to be a young person today living inside these statistics. So I wanted to center us in the perspectives of some of our young global innovators who lived these experiences and were inspired to propose their own solutions. From young changemakers in Nepal, I heard that we need to be helping youth find not only decent, but also desirable work and explore their innate passions and skills as they transition from really rigid education systems into developing economies. From youth workers in Zambia, I heard that building up self-confidence and entrepreneurial skills of poor and marginalized young women is absolute priority, as the pandemic's effects have really hit these populations the hardest. And finally, young trailblazers in Ghana and Botswana shared the need to revitalize youth well-being and mental health in the workplace and embrace new, flexible forms of work to combat disengagement. So the urgent need to bring about just transitions in work and achieve SDGs 1 and 8 is so much more than an abstract statistic or talking point to youth. It really resonates with global experiences and desires to radically transform work as we know it. I hope with this, we have some common understanding to now move to our panel. And let's begin with a fireside chat with our first 2 speakers, Sue and Mona, zooming in on how youth are transforming work today. So I want to invite you, Mona, to take the floor and in just 3 minutes, respond to the fact that in the wake of the global pandemic, it's clear that the dynamics between employers and employees are changing. So I wonder in what ways you at your work at ASET are seeing young people reimagining work for all and how other generations might support these transitions. Mona, over to you. I think we might need to unmute you. Maybe while we're waiting for Mona, I'll pose the question to Sue. Sue, I wonder if you could come in on this and talk about how, from your work studying some of these trends globally at LinkedIn, how might you be seeing some of the dynamics changing around youth and work?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, love to, Sarah, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon and this morning. So look, I think you summarized it really well in your introduction, that this is a moment where we are seeing very fundamental change in how everybody, especially young people, are thinking about work and approaching work. And, there's no starker period of that than over the course of the pandemic, right? Where we went through this enormous generational shift for young workers, older workers, and everybody in between, in an entire reimagining, as you say, of how it is we work, where we work, and indeed why we work. And the where and the how, I think, it's brought home to all of us. And today is a great example of that, right? Where typically these kind of events, as well as so many meetings and interactions, would all have taken place in person. But that acceleration of digitization, that rapid shift to remote and hybrid work has really upended how people work and where they think about it. And I think in addition to that, the pandemic really brought about this mass moment of reflection, not just about the where and the how, but also the why. Why is it we work? And I think that questioning and that reimagining, above all, was driven by young people. And for us at LinkedIn, we saw that in two very, very key ways. The first was that real focus on flexibility and work-life balance. So young people really thinking again about how is it that I set up my life? What role does work play? How do I balance it with my personal responsibilities and ensure that work is working for me? And you referenced there the importance of ensuring we're building inclusive economies and bringing in young girls and women into the economy. We saw that really clearly in that focus on flexibility. So we continue to see in our data that women are 24% more likely than men to apply for a remote job. And we can imagine that is because women need that flexibility because of the other responsibilities that they have typically had to manage more so than men. So that is a great example where we see young people really thinking about how can I set up my life in a way that work works for me. And the second key area I'd call out where we've seen this reimagining in a very stark way is a huge focus by young people on purpose. Again, going back to the why of work. Why is it that I'm doing this job? And a real demanding by young people that the work they do has purpose and advances the things that they care about. So historically, we would have seen candidates choosing companies because of those typical metrics: salary, level, title, ability to be promoted. Today, we see young people asking very fundamentally of companies, what do you stand for? Do you share my values? Do you care about the environment? Do you care about diversity, inclusion, and belonging? And choosing to work for companies, or indeed set up companies, not just because of the salary or the title, but because they embody the values that they themselves care about. And that, I think, has been quite a fundamental shift driven by young people over the past number of years.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that really resonates with, I think, what not only people in Western and the global North economies are talking about, but really all over the world. What is the purpose of work? How do I need to be working? How can I support my life better through work? I wonder if, Mona, we can bring you off mute now to respond to the same question. How are young people reimagining work for all?
Thanks, Saru, and good to be here. So I agree with a lot of what Susan has just mentioned, but I would also like to add the dimension of, yes, work is changing. There's a lot of differences in the dynamics between employers and employees, as we're seeing now. But from the African perspective, because here at Asset, we work predominantly on African economies, we see that for us, it's not so much that evolution happening because we still have a lot of young people working in the informal sector. So in Africa and in places, lots of developing economies, we do not want to rapidly move too much towards, say, the gig economy, or, because that might, for young people, mean more insecure work. So we, in a recently published study, which looked at 6 countries in Africa and how we're strengthening education systems for young people to prepare them for the 4th Industrial Revolution. We're looking at recommendations that are centered around, one, how we're increasingly formalizing work in the informal sector to ensure that we're providing decent jobs for young people, more secure jobs, for example. We recently in the news, you've seen a lot of companies, big tech companies outsourcing and setting up hubs in Africa, but we need to ensure that these are not temp jobs that leave young people insecure, for example, and young people are not being exploited. While the flexibility and all of that, it's great. Secondly, we need to make sure that we're equipping young people with the digital skills that is required to be able to take up some of these future jobs that are coming. So work is being reimagined. We're seeing a lot of work in the tech industry, for example, that require a lot of digital skills. Again, going back to the study I was talking about earlier on, one of the skills that we saw that was lacking significantly for young people on the continent was digital skills. So we still have young people who do not have access to computers, for example, to be able to acquire such skills and to be able to compete in the world of work, both for current jobs and for future jobs. And the move towards flexible working poses a great advantage for young people with digital skills, for example, to be able to work remotely from the safety of their home. Another point I wanted to make is that it's so important, this flexibility jobs for particularly young women, because this means that we're able to work from a more secure location, because again, the demography of young women who are not in very secure locations, for example, so even commuting to work, but that shift to remote working or to flexible working provides that for young women. We have another study that looks at barriers and enablers for young women participating in the labor market. And this, again, is one of the significant findings. So we encourage more investment in digital skills, because this would expand job opportunities for young women, and also investing in secure workplaces and adaptive workplaces for young people. So.
Excellent. No, thank you for bringing us back to that as well, and that more flexible work doesn't always mean better work. It can often mean more precarious work for youth, especially, and people on the margins of society. So we need to be careful about that as these transitions are happening. So I think that as we talk about all these exciting transformations in the future of work, I think it's very important that we talk not only about young people today who make up half the world's population already, but also the 11 billion people that are yet to be born by the end of this century, primarily in young and marginalized countries in Africa and the global South. So I wonder, Sue, I'll invite your thoughts first on what you think is needed to help people today and tomorrow access the next generation of jobs.
It's so true what Mona was saying about just how rapidly things have changed, and digital skills are such a great example of that. Again, we saw this acceleration throughout the course of the pandemic, where now just basic digital skills are a real requirement just to be able to work remotely, work in a hybrid way, and access some of the opportunities that Mona was speaking to. And that we speak a lot about just how fast the world of work has been changing, but we need to get ready for an even faster pace of change, like you say, for those new people who are going to be coming into the labor market in the coming years. And when we look at the stats around that, Sarah, it's very, very stark. So when we look at the average job, the skills that made up the average job, since 2015, they've already changed 25%. And when we look out to 2027, they will have changed another 50%. So already for those young people who will be coming into the market in 5 years' time, that job may look fundamentally different to how it does today. And if you think about not just from the worker side, in terms of even if you don't change the job is changing on you. If you think about it from the labor market side, in terms of the supply of human capital we're going to need to meet the challenges we have, the SDG targets of 2030, the climate change targets of 2030, we cannot keep doing things the way we have always done them. And for us at LinkedIn, it's a huge driver behind why we're advocating for a skills-first approach to talent. That is to say that we need to get away from the historic reliance we've had on these traditional credentials, like we hire people based on what school they went to, what degree do they have, what masters do they have, did they do that job before, did they do that job 8 jobs ago, and focus less on those credentials and more on, does this person have the skills and ability to do this job? That is what is going to be crucially important if we're going to ensure workers can keep a pace with the pace of change that's happening, and if we're going to ensure that companies are going to have access to the talent that we need. And the good news is that that is already starting to happen because of some of the fundamental shifts that we're seeing in terms of the technological change, in terms of demographic shifts. We're already seeing 45% of hirers on LinkedIn explicitly looking at skills when they're searching for a candidate. So instead of, again, that typical, I'll search by school, I'll search by degree, I'll search by previous experience, they're now going straight to skills. And we see the same on the worker side. So just in the past year, we've seen 390 million skills added to the platform. So almost over a million skills a day. So we are seeing this shift happening, but to your point, Sarah, if we're going to get ready and have young people ready for all of the changes that are coming, the enormous challenges that face us, and that we really need to see material progress on by 2030, we need to move away from that old way of doing things and focus on skills and getting workers the skills they need at the right time and continuing to reskill people as they move through the life cycle of their careers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sue. And Mona, I'll turn to you very quickly. What do you think of this from your perspective in the Africa region, where many of these future majority countries are?
Yes, great. So building on the points you have made about things just changing so rapidly. There's a popular example I give. If I had said 20 years ago to my parents that I wanted to be a TikTok influencer or a content creator, they wouldn't even know what that was. But now it's a steady job category for young people, for young creatives across the globe. So that goes to show that we don't even know the jobs that are yet to come in the next 20 years and a couple of decades down the line. Yes, the focus should be on skills. I agree with you on that. And at Asset, we have been working at the policy level to ensure that our curriculums in schools are moving away from the rote learn and focus on just passing exams and focusing on curriculums that are equipping young people with the skills they need, not just technical skills, but 21st century skills and the soft skills, the critical thinking, the problem solving, all of that these are skills that regardless of what job you're working, a decade from now, 2 decades from now, you're going to need some of these skills. And we're encouraging governments and all stakeholders to emphasize these in curriculums in schools so that we're making sure that young people are being prepared for both current and future jobs. The second thing is a greater involvement of employers, again, in the education system, because we see a disconnect between the education system and employers. But the education system feeds the labor market, more or less. So we need a greater connection between employers, and how this can happen, for example, greater involvement in curriculum development, greater involvement in offering things like career and guidance counseling, for example, having internships, greater opportunities for internships for young people during their time in school so that they're having hands-on experience even before they complete their education and understanding what is required in the world of work. And we see that employers, from our research, employers are keen to engage because they also realize that this skills mismatch isn't serving them very well in the labor market, and they're having to reskill a lot of new entrants into the labor market. So these two key areas, I will repeat: incorporating especially soft skills in our curriculums in school, and greater involvement for employers in education and how we teach our young kids.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you both. I think that's a really inspiring way forwards for a skills first approach and that can be inclusive of many global economies. And I think it's important that we now turn to Matthieu and Ruth to hear more about how we can really make sure we're building these skills in all youth and making sure all of them can benefit from it. And just reminding all speakers that we only have about 3 minutes for each person to respond to the question so we can have as much Q&A as possible. So I'd love to start with you, Matthieu, and ask your thoughts on where some of the jobs of the future are going to come from, building on what we've just heard, and how we can ensure that all young people really have the right skills to do them so that we leave no one behind in the ways that Sue and Mona have just highlighted.
Well, thanks so much, Saru, and it's great to be here. And the discussion is really excellent. I think going in the right direction. So, of course, that's the big question: where are the jobs going to be? Considering, as we have just heard, and it's absolutely true that we don't know what jobs will even exist in the next 10 to 20 years. So we have to also rely on foundations. We try to take a step back and take it from a different perspective at the ILO when 3 years ago we celebrated our first centenary. We turned 100 years old. It was an opportunity to look a little bit at where we stood in the world of work. And we saw three, let's say, three pillars that were at the source of change for the world of work. And those were those that depended on technology. And we alluded to that today with LinkedIn and others. Population dynamics, so of course the youth bulge in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and aging societies in Eastern Asia, Europe, and part of the Americas, and of course climate change. And out of these three drivers, we then understood that they were of course key sectors of growth in terms of jobs. And if we could, of course, it's not completely comprehensive, but if we could allocate them in three categories, the main source of jobs of the future, we believe, will come in care jobs, in green jobs, and in digital sphere, digital economy. So let me try to go quickly in each of these three categories. First, the care economy. We've just produced a report that shows that if things are done well, and that's a big if because it requires a lot of political will and a lot of compromises, up to 300 million jobs could be created in a care economy. It's just been said, no need to repeat that. It's absolutely essential coming out of the pandemic, the COVID-19, that we need to value our care workers much more, and much more needs to be done. For those who are in unpaid care, that's important, and for those who are in paid care. But for those 3 million jobs to be created, we need to do something about the fact that most women, actually up to 600 or 649 million women, don't have access to maternity protection still. Up to 1.2 billion men of reproductive age do not have access to paternity leave. And for all of these things to happen, we need to have substantial investment. It's been numbered at about $5.4 trillion US. That's about 4.2% of global GDP. So a lot of opportunities, but a lot of work to be done to reach that point. That's for care. A lot of jobs also in the green economy, in the green sphere. We estimate up to 122 million jobs that could be created by 2050. 43 million of these jobs in renewable energy. A lot of jobs in photovoltaic, a lot of jobs also in bioenergy, renewable energy. That will be created. But for that, of course, in terms of skill, we need to rethink the training of our workforce, because up to 60% of the workforce for those jobs will need to receive some minimal formal training. And then in terms of digital economy, we have just talked about it. Essential, many jobs to be created. We estimate that about, just in the United States, 22% of those who work are somehow related to the platform economy. Many or up to 40% said that they receive at least a part of their remuneration, of their salary from the platform economy. That's great. Now, the issue that comes with that is it's great for a young man or woman in Malawi to be able to say that he or she works on crowd work for an employer who's based in Germany, to cite an example. But if this happens, who is going to make sure that this young person has access to minimum wage, social protection, occupational safety and health? All of these issues, all of these rights at work that are absolutely fundamental, and without which they would fall back into working poverty cycles, informality, and that's what we don't want to see happen. So we have to be very careful also when we speak about the creation of jobs, that these need to be based on the foundation of rights at work being well respected.
Yeah, well received. No, absolutely. And Ruth, I'll bring you in quickly to share on this from your experience. How can we ensure all young people have the right skills to do the jobs of the future?
Just to echo on what my colleagues have just said, it's true that forms of work are rapidly changing, and the traditional full-time, permanent kind of employment, which is pensionable, is quickly, and new forms of work are emerging. And recently, we've had quite a number of disruptions that are affecting the youth, like just the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change disruptions. And you could see there's a shift from where young concept of virtual work as they even think about the future of work. You find that young workers right now finding employment quite attractive because of the exploitation, the violations that come with respect to rights at work, the issues of also social security, the issues of unpaid internships. So you find that for young workers, they will quickly transition to the informal sector. So there's been a rise in the informal sector, especially in our context. And that's where they find business thriving. So even as we think about the future of work for young workers, there's provision of, a trend that is really manifesting across all the sectors in our economy. Issues of online jobs, freelancing. Young workers prefer to hold a portfolio of jobs, and where it's kind of working arrangement. So you find that as even we think about digitization of work, the gig economy, which has been growing exponentially, then we think about where is the space of young workers as far as work is involved, and the future position of a young worker in employment. And with also conformity to these changes of employment, you find that even some organizations still, where a young worker is there as a formal employee, they are still engaged in sort of casual, temporary contracts, being subcontracted to terms that are not favorable to this worker. And we think of a young worker who's someone who is mobile, and they want to experience different kinds of work environments. So and with all these dynamics, then majority of young workers want to be in employment relationships that are regulated, whereby they are also recognized as workers as their older counterparts in employment. So this shift in employment relationships comes with new forms of work, which increases vulnerability of employment of the young people. And I will echo into what my sister Mona echoed, that some of the attributing factors is because of a skills mismatch of young workers, where they end up being in employment that is not reflecting to what they had undertaken in schools. And you find that also, qualification packs for developing curriculum for young workers. Does it really speak into the issues of skilling and reskilling the issues of young workers, just, providing new skills for them to enter into the job market and be productive on the same? We tend to abound in unskilled labor, which really places a lot of young workers in unemployment. And especially where the workforce requires a lot of training and skills for a young worker to be seen as being very productive. So I think we should shift our narrative about what is presently going by the current trends and emerging issues in employment, going by where we are in this, time, in these times whereby there's a lot of new trends within the labor market, and ensuring that there's a connection between education requirements and the training systems that are in place to cushion and integrate the issues of the young workers within our employment sector. And in line with the global campaigns on the issue of future of work, then we see that young workers are change agents, and until we want to see that there's promotion of innovations that directly impact on future of work and their technical capacity to respond to these transformations taking place in the world of work, then it is very important to invest in skills development for the young workers, especially in this wake of the changing world of work. There's also the digitization of the process of engaging young workers. Young workers are all over the digital spaces, and as we talk about change, which is inevitable, then we really need to bring it to the face of young workers and go with the current trends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Yeah, I think it's absolutely vital. And I think that we've talked about this a little bit, but it leads to my next question, which I think we can answer very quickly, mindful of time, maybe just in about a minute, if you can, as we've already touched on a lot of these themes, but recognizing, the marginalized populations and touching on what Matthieu spoke of about the care networks, perhaps as one strategy to reach them, recognizing that globally, nearly 1 in 4 girls between ages 15 to 19 are not in any type of education, employment, or training, compared to 1 in 10 boys the same age, really highlights what you are all talking about. And I wonder how we can reach and include marginalized populations like them in the future of work. Very quickly, in just 1 minute, no pressure, if you can. Matthieu, I'll bring you in first on this.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yes, well, very quickly, we have to address the issue of skills, introducing young people to the world of work at an early age, through quality internship programs, apprenticeship programs, and we have to do that in a way to try to break those barriers, those societal barriers, which predispose some to think that there are gender expectations for the role of young women as caregivers. And this is missing out on an opportunity of up to 600 million adolescent girls not to materialize their potential. And when we lose out on half of our population, we also lose out on half of our almost GDP and opportunities. So everybody loses. So we have to, I think, address those issues very clearly to make sure that the activity rate, and I also want to refer here to the need rate, those who are not in employment, education, or training, is actually addressed adequately. When you interview, when you survey young people, up to more than 70% of all young women interviewed, they want to have a work, they want to have a job. There's no question that they want to stay at home and doing other things. So we have to actually need to forge that political will, to work alongside with teachers as well, as very important. And along the way, as it was mentioned before, reiterate the importance of those soft skills, so-called soft skills, foundation skills, literacy, numeracy skills, introducing notions of business at school so that if you are going to become an entrepreneur, you learn what is a gross profit, gross margin, this type of things, transferable skills like critical thinking, problem solving, and also, of course, the bread and butter of technical and vocational skills. So it's a lot to do, but needs to be done.
Great, thank you. And Ruth, I'll bring you in very quickly in a minute, if you can respond.
I think we really need to work on intersectional approach to youth engagement, whereby we need to create a lot of awareness among key stakeholders. This has to be rolled out in community, especially for knowledge exchange. Let it not be that a young worker wants to earn for a white collar job, and and working in the public sector, and having these high occupations instead of even focusing on a lot of innovations around self-employment, private sector, green job, and breaking the cultural bias of long-term and pensional employment is for old people, and the youth also need to take their position as far as employment concerned. So I think this goes down to the government, the right grassroots, to ensure that affirmative action is really taken to ensure that the youth access relevant the training and education, and they have an opportunity to to associate themselves and access better systems and structures for them to be taken through training that is really relevant and that really captures the where we are at the moment. You find that there's a mainstreaming of youth programs within our structures, but you get now to the grassroots implementation is also quite challenging. So this calls for government of the day to really make an initiative to ground the issues of the youth right from where the children are growing up, what the areas of exploration, where can we develop them. Can we also expose them to, entrepreneurial potential of a youth at that level as they, they grow upwards to ensure that they're really cushioned on and transformed within the areas of generational learning.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you both. Thank you, all the speakers, for so much food for thought. I think I'd like to open us up quickly before we take some audience questions for one fire round question for each speaker to very briefly weigh in just 2 minutes, maybe 1 minute if you can, as we're mindful of time. So we're coming up on some very pivotal milestones this year with less than 7 months to go to the SDG Summit in September, and then 7 years to the end of the SDG agenda in 2030. And with these in mind, to all speakers, what are the most vital gaps we must address to help young people chart a new course for a more inclusive and fair global economy? And I'll bring in Sue, maybe, if I can first, in just maybe 1 minute to respond.
Very quickly, 2 things to really focus on. The first is, as I said again, we're not going to reach any of those targets if we keep doing things the way we've always done them. So that, and we've heard it from all the panelists, that real focus on skills, not relying on those traditional credentials, but really focusing on getting young people the skills they need and continuing to invest in reskilling and upskilling so that we can keep pace with the changes that we all know are coming down the track. So fundamentally, first and foremost, a mindset shift. And secondly, crucially, that needs to be informed by data. At LinkedIn, we're incredibly fortunate. We've over 900 million members spread across almost every country in the world. So we're really able to see in real time and in real detail what's going on out there. Our role is to help organizations that are on this call, governments, multilaterals around the world, to empower them with those insights so that we can help them see what's happening right now, monitor progress, and make changes and interventions in a timely and effective way.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, going to you, Mona, next in 1 minute. Oh, there you're unmuted.
Thanks. So the gaps, again, I will emphasize that we need to be looking at our education systems. As we recommended in that asset report I was referring to, we need to ensure that our education system as it is, before we can achieve the goal of ensuring young people have decent jobs, it starts in the education system. So we're having curriculums that are future-proof by ensuring that we're incorporating employers as stakeholders in our education system. And then the next one for me will be really ensuring that, because young women still face the challenges that we face both in school and in the world of work, ensuring that we're creating adaptive workplaces that are convenient for young women for us to be able to participate adequately in the world of work.
Thank you, Matthieu. Quickly, if you can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I think there are 5 points that I'd like to mention quickly that I think are essential going forward. The first one I was referring to before on the political will. Well, we need to have governments talking to workers and employers and developing plans. We need to have visions developed through macroeconomic and employment policies or plans directly focused on youth and youth employment. So either employment policies that include youth or specific youth employment policies and strategies. That's the first thing that's absolutely essential to have those documents at the helm of every country. Then we need to have labor market policies in place. Labor market policies to help young people find jobs, develop their CV, do mock interviews to employment service centers, for example, or in other means, community-led work to provide some jobs locally. So we need to push for those labor market policies. Third, and it's been mentioned a lot already in our discussion, is everything about skills training, revising curriculum at technical vocational education training, revamping, the architecture and the materials and the equipment of those TVET center, and revising skills so that they match the labor and supply can match better. Fourth, I also alluded to it, entrepreneurship and self-employment, because not everybody will find a job. A lot of people will need to create their own jobs. Not everyone is made to be an entrepreneur, and yet we don't learn what entrepreneurship means when we are at school. So we need to absolutely have those fundamental ideas of what it means, what it takes to be an entrepreneur when we are still young enough, and that we can develop and mature our decision to become an entrepreneur as opposed to becoming an entrepreneur as a result of a lack of choice and ultimately failing businesses that we see is most oftentimes the case. And finally, and I say this as a fifth point, and in fact, it's, I think, the most essential, the most important is to push for rights at work, to make sure that every young person is aware of their rights so that they can be in the stronger situation and position to discuss with their potential employer, so that we decrease the level of discrimination and abuse that may exist, and also for employers to be aware of those rights, because oftentimes they're not fully aware. So I think these are five essential avenues.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those points. Ruth, I'll bring you in finally to wrap us up quickly, just a few points on this question.
Yeah, I echo what Matthieu just talked about on rights at work, which makes it even attractive for young workers to enjoy their employment, and to add on that also regulation of their work by governments. You find that oftentimes that labor inspectors do not want to go into the informal economy and find out what is happening there for young workers. Alluding it to the fact that we have workers within, the gig economy, like Uber drivers who work away from knowing where the employers are situated, and even after going through some difficult terms of engagement, then you find it is very difficult to regulate such kinds of employment. So really as well push for regulation of work, especially where young workers are, issues of labor inspection at the workplaces, and respect to rights of young workers at the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, I think that we've heard really actionable points here, and I want to now turn us over to our Q&A session with our audience. We've heard so much about key considerations for the future of work, as well as interlinkages across the SDGs, which is, of course, the overarching topic of our brainstorm this year as we head to UNGA in September. It's been really great to see questions and hear remarks about education, maternal health, renewable energy, financing, partnerships, which once again emphasize the need to work intersectionally. And we've selected a few cross-cutting questions just for the sake of time. I'd like to start with a question from James Blissett, one of our innovators in the Climate and Sustainability Action Group, who asked a question to you, Sue. Can you elaborate on how young people will be provided these digital skills, and what initiatives are currently in place? What specifically do you think needs to be done? Over to you, Sue.
It's a great question, and I think it fundamentally comes back to what we're speaking about, which is how, if we take a skills first approach to work, how do we then ensure that we can make sure we're, first of all, identifying what are the skills needed for the in-demand jobs, then getting them in front of the workers who need them, and then continuing to reskill those workers as those jobs change. And digital is a really great example of that. And again, we've all seen just how fundamentally digital, the world of digital, the need to have basic and advanced digital skills has really accelerated over the past number of years. And I would encourage everybody to look at beyond and in addition to the traditional routes people have gone to acquire these skills, to look at other ways of upskilling and reskilling yourself. So again, there's been this explosion of online learning, of on-demand learning throughout the pandemic. We ourselves at LinkedIn have partnered with Microsoft to launch a program to help 10 million people learn digital skills needed for those most in-demand skills. So again, we're leveraging our data. We're looking at not just where are the jobs today, but where will they be tomorrow? What are the skills that will be needed? And again, designing custom programs that you can access on demand for free through this program so that you're ready to take on those jobs and take on those opportunities. And I would encourage everyone to think about their career in this dynamic, responsive, continuous way and access the great resources that are out there, including on LinkedIn and Microsoft.
Thank you for sharing those resources. I'll turn now to a question from Mona, coming from Lame, one of our young innovators from Botswana in the Jobs and Economic Opportunities Action Group. They share that unemployment is a global challenge, clearly, but it continues to hit developing countries in Africa and the global south the hardest and send young people in search of work and education opportunities elsewhere. So how is this mass migration influencing the future of work? And what strategies can we use to revitalize domestic economies for young people?
That's a really good question, and I should say a rather complex one, because as you were saying, interlinkages. So yes, migration, mass migration, we're seeing that brain drain, right? We're seeing continents like Africa losing the best of our minds, most often to more developed economies, whereas we really need them here. So for me, I think these are some of the weaknesses when it comes to our African economies. We're simply not creating enough jobs. Current data shows that we have a gap of about 3 million jobs each year that we're simply not creating on the continent to absorb new entrants. So this is not even those who are already there. New entrants to the labor market. And what we need is to go back to the fundamental macroeconomic principles, ensuring that we're industrializing. So at ASSET, we have our growth with depth model, which looks at how African economies can transform so that we have more industrialized economies, which would mean more jobs that we're creating. And the opportunities, for example, in smart climate, and we're seeing smart energy, for example, there are new sectors that we can explore. It doesn't have to be the usual primary mining, agriculture, for example, and digital economy, for example. We've seen Google and Facebook, all of that opening companies here offsite and outsourcing jobs onto the continent. So which means that they have identified that we have the labor here, and it's just a matter of our governments ensuring that they're doing the things that they need to do, transforming our economies, taking opportunities of new economies that are emerging, that we need to capitalize on, looking at our comparative advantage. So it's more complex than this, but these are the key things that we could start with.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Moving to a question from Florence Lungu, one of our young innovators from the Jobs and Economic Opportunities Action Group as well. She asked, what are some of the examples of the skills that are needed for now and future jobs? Let me take this to you, Matthieu, as you came in on this earlier.
Yes, yeah, thank you. So, of course, the skills that are needed for now and for the future are those related to the jobs of the future that we refer to, right? So, care, green, digital, these are essential ones. But we also have to focus on those soft skills, as I was mentioning before. So it's important to see that even when we are in school and growing up, we are able, and I think it's our colleague from LinkedIn is mentioning that as well, is that we are not going to be judged on the type of, the past that we have had, necessarily the type of schools that we have been to, but really the skills that we know how to perform and to exercise. So we need to have some focus on those foundational skills, on literacy and numeracy skills, on those critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, and of course, those technical and vocational skills. And I'd like to reiterate that was what I was mentioning before, because it pertains to such a large proportion of the population, to number one, make sure that rights at work actually are embedded in what we teach young people as they grow up, so that when it's time for young people to leave the school system and enter the world of work, they are better prepared to what they should be expecting in terms of what are their rights, why there is a 8-hour week, why there are minimum wages, why if you're a young woman, you should have access to maternity leave, and so on and so forth. That's essential. And this is, even though we spend most of our life at work, as we grow up, we are not taught any of that. Usually when we grow up around the dinner table, our parents don't talk about that. So there's really no one to prepare us. And then the second thing where we are, I believe, not prepared sufficiently at all, is the entry into self-employment and entrepreneurship. So again, it makes very little sense that we are not prepared for where most will actually enter, which is start your own business. And we know the failure rates, particularly with young people, and we know that they decrease fundamentally if young people are actually able to understand and observe what the world of work is all about at a younger age. So let's push for those quality internship programs, for those apprenticeship programs, but let's make sure that they are inclusive for those who live with HIV and other disease, those who live in remote and isolated areas, and all of those most vulnerable as well. So for that, there's no other way than to focus on social dialogue and to work very closely with governments, with workers, and with employers, because the three of them hold the key to the solution.
Thank you. One question for Ruth now from Christine Karanjake in the chat. She had some great questions as well. What can we do to ensure that we protect the Global South from predatory modern workplaces? For example, it's reported that big tech companies are often getting cheap labor from the Africa continent. So what do you think we can do to make sure that we're protecting the Global South?
I think there's the issue of bilateral agreements and trade agreements that states sign together, especially on the status of its citizens as they migrate or they come into their country as internal migrants. So as we just talked about stakeholder consultation, when it comes to really looking within the agreements that we take, then we play a better role into ensuring that the provisions, especially for the terms of employment in which workers are being engaged, is really taken into consideration. And it really looks into the issues of the youth, especially on the areas of cooperation that are provided for within the said contract. Then there's the issue of labor migration, which is uncontrollable, as I may say, for the young workers who really want to move for, looking for greener pastures and better job employment. We say that for any young worker that really want to migrate to another region for employment, which is a good thing, then it is really important to be cognizant of the terms of engagement. As much as we may want young workers to get employment, then what are they subscribing into? Even as they subscribe into those terms and conditions, are they decent in nature? Are they looking at, social protection? Is it something that is worth their value addition within that employment engagement? So is it even, upskilling them, especially for the skills that are required for them to take up that role efficiently? So looking at all these issues around engagement of this young worker into employment, then we can say that even as they take up that role, then they need to ensure that terms and conditions are set prior before engagement, so that it informs the decency of the work that they are engaged into.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes back to the point Matthieu made about ensuring young workers know their rights in the workplace.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So one question now from Felipe Bosch, who's an innovator in the Future Generations Action Group, to Mona. If the best case scenario unfolds, Africa becomes an interconnected continent of highly industrialized, healthy, and prominent economies, would that be enough to absorb all of the work offered, noting the youth bulge and so much talent? Mona, to you.
Yes. So if we're creating enough jobs on the continent, I believe that we will be able to absorb the youth bulge that we're seeing on the continent. We may even begin to import labor from elsewhere because we are a large continent. I think we often forget just how massive Africa is as a continent. And so if we're able to, as he says, ideal scenario, but that's not to say that we do not encourage free labor mobility, right? Because this is where we, and as you can see on this platform, great minds from all over the place globally. And so this enhances in itself productivity. And we often see that experience gained from outside Africa is brought back to the continent. We have huge contribution from the diaspora, for example, being made onto investments onto the continent. So that's not to say that this is against labor mobility, but absolutely, we are capable of absorbing and creating enough jobs to absorb the youth bulge that we have and take advantage of our demographic dividend. If we start now, we're not going to be able to do it if we don't start now, and then in the next decade or two, we're going to keep being a net exporter of labor to more developed economies.
Thank you so much. And Sue, I'll end it with you. A question for you from Brandy OA in the comments. How do we make jobs in the blue and green economy available to young people? How do we prepare them from that? I know you've done some work on this.
That's right, Sarah. We do a ton of work, again, leveraging the incredible insights that we have on the labor market to try and understand how are we positioned to transition the workforce so that it has these green skills, can do these green jobs, can really help us and empower us to hit those 2030 targets. And again, I would say the key takeaway for young people is it all comes back to skills, right? So try to think not just about green jobs. So often we think about green jobs in the green sector, they're very technical, that aren't for me. We need to not only think about the green transition as the green sector, but rather think about the green transition needing to encompass all sectors. So we need all countries, all sectors. If we're going to hit those 2030 and indeed those 2050 targets, we need everybody doing their job, whether it's a traditional job or a new green job, in a much more sustainable way. And the way you do that is you acquire green skills. And we have a great green report, I'm sure we can share it afterwards, that sets out some of the detail in terms of what skills are needed for what jobs, again, to transition not only those traditional sectors, but the ones that are coming through and really at the forefront of the green revolution. So again, think about it through a skills lens and in a way that is accessible for you where you are now. That can be done again by adding a few green skills. You can do what you're doing now in a much more sustainable way and play your part.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, and please do share that report afterwards. So I think we've heard a wonderful, rich discussion of steps that are needed to transform economies, making them supportive and equitable for young people. There's been a huge focus on increasing economic opportunities for young people in Africa. Many of you in the chat are commenting your questions. So I really encourage all participants to join tomorrow's Spotlight session at 9 a.m. ET. It's going to be on renewing multilateralism and the rising prominence of Africa to explore some of those questions further. Just to wrap us up here in reflecting on some of the insights from this session, I think all of our speakers highlighted that the burden and also opportunity is really on us to ensure all young people today and in future generations can access the right skills and resources for rapidly changing work amid some of these digital and green transformations, but also really access strong care and education systems that can provide support and lower the risk of cycles of poverty and exclusion. As Mona and Sue referenced, we need to be supporting young people in questioning and reimagining work, but also ensure this is based on global evidence and experience, and that we're helping youth in precarious work environments as work becomes more flexible and undergoes some of these rapid transformations. And then, as Ruth and Matthieu highlighted, we really need the political will to recognize the marginalized populations, such as young women, that are not in employment, education, or training, and implement targeted strategies to support them and address their needs. I'm feeling very hopeful and affirmed by all of our global young innovators, many of whom you heard from today, who have proposed their job solutions for our big brainstorm, and they're addressing these issues in radical ways. Do follow us and them on social media, connect with them, which you can do through the QR code on the screen. And please do help them rally around job solutions by liking and sharing the jobs post. We have more spotlights every weekday at 9 a.m. ET. Tomorrow's is on multilateralism and the rising prominence of Africa, so be sure to join that. Thank you so much again to our incredible speakers and to all of you for joining us.